All right, let's turn now to a current event happening tonight. This one's for my history and dinosaur lovers. In 2022, down in rural Wayne County, Iowa, a resident discovered a really well-preserved mastodon bone. Now, this led to the excavation of a 13,600-year-old mastodon, and it made national news. And tonight, Dr. John Dorshak, an adjunct professor at the University of Iowa, will host a free talk all about mastodons and this discovery at the Deere-Wiman Carriage House in Moline. But you don't have to wait until 7 o'clock. We sat down with Dr. Dorshak ahead of time, new tonight, here on The Current. Dr. Dorshak, thank you so much for joining us here today. Can I start with the obvious question? What is a mastodon?
Well, thank you for having me. And a mastodon is a proboscidean, which is a biological classification that puts it in the same category as modern African elephants and Indian elephants that your viewers are probably pretty familiar with, but also then with other extinct forms, including mammoths. And mastodons are distinct from mammoths insofar as what part of the landscape they lived in. Mastodons were browsers as opposed to grazers. So it's kind of like the difference between goats and cows insofar as mastodons were the goat-like browsers and mammoths were the cow-like grazers in terms of the ancient landscape during the Ice Age.
And was it common to have them be found in Iowa and Illinois?
Well, I was looking at a map actually of the history of discoveries of these kinds of animals, and many of them took place in the first half of the 1900s when landscapes were being dramatically changed for agricultural purposes, and people were digging tiles and things that aren't done as much now. And many of the discoveries that were made, unfortunately, were a tooth here, a tusk there, maybe part of a skull or some other large bone that was easily recognized as belonging to one of these massive animals. But very rarely were any details recorded. So if you look at the number of discoveries of these kinds of animals in the last 20 years, they're relatively few. So we consider them pretty important to follow up on.
Wow. Okay, so correct me if I'm wrong, please. I would think that these bones are so big, it almost might be easy to excavate them. Is that the case?
Well, it's a challenge because of their size. And if you were to encounter the entire skeleton, that would be a massive undertaking. Even with the limited finds we came up with, we found most of the skull and part of a tusk that was attached to it, and then several other larger bones. We still needed a crane to lift them up out of the creek bed and to up to where we could then transport them. So the scale of the bones is a challenge, even though the massive size of them does help them preserve.
That makes sense. All right, so let's talk about this site in Wayne County. What has been excavated so far?
Well, we think we have all that was remaining of this particular animal. The first reports of discoveries were back in 2022, but it took until 2024 for us to get all the arrangements made to do a full-scale excavation. But we feel like we probably exhausted this particular location. So we have one probably adult male, although we haven't confirmed the gender yet, but an older individual, and it's all the bones seem to come from just one animal.
Oh, that's got to be, for an archaeologist, this has got to be like hitting the jackpot.
Well, it would have been especially so if we had found stone tools made by humans in direct association, and we did not do that during the excavation. But we're still looking very carefully as we clean the bones for evidence of cut marks made by stone tools, which might give us an indirect link, and that would be especially cool in my book. But even so, just working on a dig of this scale was fantastic.
All right, before I let you go, what can people expect at your talk this evening? What should they look forward to?
Yeah, I'll go into much more detail about the origins of mastodons and their history, their distribution on the landscape, and what makes them special. I'll talk some about the connections potentially between the first people on the landscape here and mastodons, because there was some overlap, and that's really what we were focusing on. And then details on the excavation itself, lots of pictures of us actually, how we went about excavating the mastodon and recovering it, and then a little bit about what's going on in terms of the research part.
Dr. Dorshak, you've got one cool job. Thank you so much for joining us here today.
Thanks for having me.
For you guys at home, once again, you can check out Dr. Dorshik's free presentation tonight at 7 o'clock. We've got all the details on WQAD.com underneath the As Seen on TV tab.